They say on Route 666 in Pennsylvania, the road doesn't just lead to your destination. Sometimes, it leads to a place that isn't on any map. My name was written on a rusted grave by the roadside, and I haven't even died yet. The rain was screaming against my windshield. I was driving through the thick, black forests of the Allegheny National Forest. My GPS had died an hour ago. The clock on my dashboard was stuck at 3:14 a.m. I saw a small, flickering neon sign ahead, Mama's Roadside Diner. I needed coffee. I needed to see a human face. As I walked in, the bell above the door rang with a sharp, cold sound. An old man was sitting at the counter, his hands shaking as he held a ceramic mug. He didn't look at me. He looked through me. "You're headed north, son?" he asked. His voice sounded like dry leaves scraping on a tombstone. "Yeah," I replied, shivering from the Pennsylvania cold. "Just trying to get to Erie." The old man finally looked up. His left eye was clouded with a thick, white film. "Listen to me. When you get back on that road, you will see a sign. Mile marker 66. It's a rusted piece of metal. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see in your rearview mirror, do not stop." I laughed nervously. "Why? Is the road broken?" The old man leaned in. I could smell old earth and rotting wood on his breath. "The road is fine. It's the passengers that are the problem. At mile marker 66, the hitchhiker with the crooked neck is waiting. If your wheels stop spinning, he stops being outside and starts being inside." I paid for my coffee and left. I thought he was just a crazy local. I started my engine and pulled back onto the dark highway. The trees looked like giant, thin fingers reaching out to grab my car. 2 miles later, my headlights hit something. A small, bent metal post. Mile marker 66. Suddenly, my car engine began to cough. My heart dropped. The lights on my dashboard flickered and died. The car slowed down. "No, no, no. Not here," I screamed, hitting the steering wheel. The car rolled to a complete stop right next to the sign. It was deathly silent. Then I heard it. I looked at the rearview mirror. There was no one behind the car. But when I looked down at the leather seat behind me, it was wet. A puddle of dark, muddy water was forming on the seat, as if someone invisible was sitting there, soaking wet from the rain. Then, a voice whispered right into my ear, cold as ice. "Thanks for the ride." The doors locked themselves with a loud click. I looked at the mirror again. A pair of pale, blue hands reached around my headrest. The click of the door locks sounded like a gunshot in the silent car. My breath hitched in my throat. I was frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. In the dark, cramped space of my sedan, the air suddenly changed. It became heavy, smelling of stagnant swamp water and old, wet wool. I didn't want to look. Every instinct in my body told me that if I looked into the rearview mirror, my life would end. But I couldn't stop myself. Slowly, my eyes drifted upward to the glass. The back seat was empty, or at least it looked empty, but the dark puddle on the leather was growing. It wasn't just water, it was thick, black mud that seemed to be bubbling. Then, the seat began to sink, as if an invisible weight, the weight of a heavy body, had just sat down directly behind me. "Who's there?" I whispered. My voice cracked. The car was freezing, my breath forming a thick mist in front of my face. There was no answer, only the sound of a slow, wet struggle. It sounded like someone was trying to move their limbs through thick glue. Then came a sound that made my skin crawl. The sharp, wet crack of a bone. Snap. Crack. It sounded like a neck being twisted beyond its natural limit. The pale, blue hands I had seen earlier were gone, but the pressure on the back of my seat was increasing. I felt a coldness creeping over my shoulder. It wasn't just a temperature, it was a presence. I felt something wet and cold touch the side of my neck. It felt like a long, slimy finger tracing my vein. "Please," I sobbed, closing my eyes. "Just let me go? Take the car. Just let me go." A soft, raspy giggle filled the car. It wasn't human. It sounded like air escaping a punctured lung. The whispering started again, but this time it wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus of whispers, overlapping each other, coming from the floor, the roof, and the seat beside me. They were all saying the same thing. "You stopped at the marker. The price is a soul." I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, praying for a miracle. The engine groaned, sputtered, and suddenly roared to life. The headlights cut through the darkness, hitting the trees of the Pennsylvania woods. I didn't wait. I shifted into gear and screamed as I sped away from mile marker 66. The car flew down the wet highway at 80 miles per hour. I thought I was safe. I thought I had escaped. But then I looked at the dashboard. The speedometer was climbing, 90, 100, 110, but my foot wasn't on the gas anymore. The pedal was moving on its own, being pushed down by an invisible force. I looked down at the floor mat. A pair of bare, rotting feet, blue from the cold and covered in grave dirt, were pressing down on the pedals. And they weren't alone. From the corner of my eye, I saw a head rise slowly from the passenger footwell. A face with no eyes, just dark, empty sockets, and a neck that was bent at a 90-degree angle, stared up at me. The creature opened its mouth, and instead of a scream, my own voice came out of it. "Where are we going, driver?" it asked. At that moment, I realized the car was no longer on the highway. We were driving straight into the black heart of the forest where the road ended. The car slammed through the thick brush of the Pennsylvania woods. Branches screamed against the metal like fingernails on a chalkboard. I tried to grab the steering wheel, but it was locked. It felt like holding onto a block of ice. The creature with the crooked neck didn't move. It just sat there in the passenger footwell, its sightless sockets fixed on me, its head dangling at a sickening angle. The trees began to change. They weren't normal oaks or pines anymore. They were pale, white trunks that looked like giant, bleached bones reaching out of the dark soil. The car slowed down as we entered a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a massive, dead willow tree. Hanging from its branches were hundreds of rusted metal plates. Every single one of them was a mile marker 66. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. I tried to open the door, but the handle was red hot, searing my skin. The creature leaned closer. Its skin was translucent, showing the black veins underneath. It began to hum, a low, vibrating sound that made my teeth ache. If you were listening up to this point, then be sure to listen until the end, because the real nightmare is just about to begin. I looked out the window. The clearing wasn't empty. Figures were emerging from behind the bone-white trees. Dozens of them. They all moved with the same limping, broken crawl. Some were missing arms. Others had their chests caved in. But they all had one thing in common. Their necks were snapped, their heads hanging uselessly over their shoulders. "The passengers," I whispered, my voice trembling. "They are the ones who stopped." The creature in my car finally spoke. Its voice was a wet, gurgling mess. "We didn't just stop, Brian. We were invited. Just like you." How did it know my name? I hadn't told anyone my name. I looked at the dashboard. The digital clock was no longer showing the time. It was scrolling through my personal information, my home address, my mother's phone number, the date of my birth. And then it stopped on a new date. March 21st, 2026. Today's date. Next to it, in glowing red numbers, was a countdown. For 59, for 58. The figures outside began to circle the car. They didn't have faces, just smooth, pale skin where their eyes and mouths should be. They started tapping on the glass. One tap, two taps. Then, a rhythmic drumming that shook the entire vehicle. I looked at the creature beside me. Its crooked neck suddenly snapped back into place with a sound like a dry branch breaking. It opened its mouth wide, wider than any human could, revealing rows of needle-like teeth coated in black bile. "The marker doesn't just take your life," the creature hissed, its breath smelling of ancient graves. "It takes your place. Tomorrow, someone will wake up in your bed. Someone will kiss your mother. Someone will live your life. And you will be the new mile marker 66. The countdown hit 3 o'clock. The windshield suddenly shattered inward, but the glass didn't fall. It turned into black dust that filled my lungs. As I choked, I felt the seatbelt tighten around my neck, pulling me back into the seat as the door finally swung open. The black dust filled my throat, tastes like ancient ashes and dried blood. I couldn't scream. The seatbelt was no longer a piece of fabric. It felt like a cold, muscular snake tightening around my windpipe. My vision began to blur as the air was squeezed out of me. Through the cracked windshield, I saw the figures from the woods getting closer. They didn't walk. They glided over the dead leaves, their broken necks swinging with every movement. The creature in the passenger seat leaned over me. Its face was changing. The pale, translucent skin was stretching, shifting, and taking on a familiar shape. I watched in absolute horror as its empty eye sockets filled with color, my color. Its hair grew out, turning into the same shade as mine. Even the small scar on my chin began to appear on its face. It wasn't just a monster anymore. It was looking at me through my own eyes. "You have a beautiful life, Brian," the thing said, using my exact voice. The sound was perfect, every tone and vibration identical to my own. "Your mother will never know the difference. Your friends will think you just had a long night on the road. But you are staying here in Pennsylvania." The countdown on the dashboard hit 1 o'clock. The figures outside finally reached the car. They didn't try to break in. They just pressed their cold, flat faces against the glass, watching the transformation. I felt my own bones beginning to soften. A sickening heat spread through my spine. My neck felt heavy, as if the weight of my skull was too much for my muscles to carry. Crack! The sound echoed inside the car. My head slumped onto my left shoulder. I tried to lift it, but I couldn't. The nerves were gone. I was staring at the car door at a 90-degree angle. I was becoming one of them. My memories started to leak out of my brain like water from a broken cup. I was forgetting my mother's face. I was forgetting the name of the street where I lived. All that was left was the cold, gray hunger of the woods. The creature, the new Brian, reached out and took my car keys from the ignition. It smiled at me, a perfect, human smile that I used to see in the mirror every morning. It opened the driver's side door and stepped out into the mud. It looked back at me one last time before slamming the door. I tried to reach for the handle, but my hands had turned into pale, blue claws. I looked at the dashboard one last time. The countdown hit midnight, and the car engine vanished into thin air. I wasn't in a car anymore. I was standing in the mud, barefoot and broken, holding a rusted metal sign that read, "Mile Marker 66. And then, I heard the sound of another car approaching in the distance. The sound of the approaching car was the only thing I could hear over the sound of my own shallow, rattling breath. The headlights of the new vehicle cut through the Pennsylvania fog like two golden eyes. My body was no longer my own. My skin felt like cold parchment, and my neck was permanently snapped, my head resting heavily against my collarbone. I tried to move, but I was rooted to the spot. I was the sign. I was the warning. I was the trap. The car, a silver SUV, slowed down as it saw the rusted metal of mile marker 66. Through my distorted vision, I could see a young woman behind the wheel. She looked tired. Her eyes were red from a long night of driving. She looked just like I did only a few hours ago, innocent, exhausted, and looking for a place to rest. Beside her, in the passenger seat, sat the thing that used to be me. The new Brian was smiling at her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. He looked so human, so kind. "Is this the spot?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This is it," the new Brian replied. His voice was perfect. It was my voice, but it sounded like honey laced with poison. "Just stop for a second. The engine sounds a bit strange. We should check it before we go any further into the woods." But the old man at the diner said. She started to say, her hand hovering over the brake. The old man was just a crazy local. The new Brian interrupted, leaning closer to her. "Trust me, I've driven this road 1,000 times. Just stop the car." I tried to scream. I wanted to tell her to run, to floor the gas, to never look back. But all that came out of my throat was a wet, gurgling sound that was lost in the wind. I tried to wave my blue, rotting arms, but they were frozen in place, holding the metal post of the marker. The SUV came to a complete stop. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. The woods seemed to hold their breath. Then, the shadows under the white trees began to move. The dozens of broken-necked figures crawled out of the darkness, their pale faces glowing in the SUV's taillights. They surrounded the car, their long, thin fingers scratching at the metal. The woman's eyes went wide. She looked at the new Brian, but he wasn't smiling anymore. His face began to melt, the skin sagging and turning gray. "Thanks for the ride," the thing hissed. The SUV's doors locked with a heavy, metallic thud. The woman began to scream, her hands hammering against the glass. I watched as the seatbelt crawled up her chest, tightening around her throat. I watched as her neck snapped with a loud, sickening crack. The cycle was starting again. Suddenly, a blinding white light filled the clearing. When it faded, the SUV was gone. The woman was gone. The new Brian was gone. I was still standing there, but the ground beneath me felt different. I looked down. I wasn't holding the sign anymore. I was inside the metal itself. My face was etched into the rusted steel of mile marker 66. The sun began to rise over the Pennsylvania forest, but it brought no warmth. I knew that in a few hours, the sun would set again. Another car would come. Another tired driver would see my rusted face. And I would have to watch, forever, as the road took another soul. If you are driving through the Allegheny Forest tonight and you see a sign that looks like it's bleeding, do not look at it. Because if you read the name written in the rust, it might just be your own. Only those who can handle the full story until the very end are the ones who subscribe and hit the bell icon, so they never miss the next nightmare.